Right.
Ready? We're live?
I think so.
All right, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome back. This is our dialogue section of the, or a dialogue session, I should say. So we've been back after a nice, lovely lunch again. Thank you very much. It was very good.
My pleasure.
And so now, I think we're all about ready for a nap. I'm looking around the table, and I thought it was just me,
I
but
know.
I think John's about out down there. You all right, John? Yeah.
Hanging in there.
All right. So, what are we thinking about today? I swapped up, used the board a little bit because I wanted people to kind of get a picture of the way that family comes together. I began to notice in my studies how the different groups of kids end up playing together throughout the history of modern, or all the way up through the biblical period. So you'll see certain tribes that are grouped together in various stories, and you can trace it back. Like, who's that kid's mom? You know, it's like you want to go, what's your mama's name, boy? And then you start tracking, you start noticing certain tendencies. All of this plays in. So even though I realize that some of the teachings that I present are sort of, some of them might be more gripping, some might be more this, more that. This is sort of a necessary historical background piece.
This is great. The visual, I don't know if everybody else benefits, but I really am a visual person. So this kind of thing
Yeah.
is great. It's really great.
We already talked about how to make it better.
Yeah.
You know.
And then
Got to do it over. We got to do it all over again.
Yeah, Jodell and Dave Tyler shared a link to some, charts
Right,
that
right.
that are helpful too. So
Yeah.
that's great.
And I want that. You know, I know that there are various charts to things that I bring up. Even though those are available, I want to use this as well because that way now you can go back and, like, if Jodell and Dave posted those charts, I can put a link to it in the write-up, and that way people can print it out and have a good visual of what's going on. So.
Marlene, you've been eating some garlic? I love
What
garlic. She said, waiting with bated breath.
Oh,
Wait,
yeah.
that's garlic.
Yeah. Well, we did have some good, what was that, taco salad today?
it was
Vegetarian taco salad.
Yeah,
You people don't know what you're
haystacks,
missing. If you're
whatever.
close, you need to come join us.
Yeah.
By the way, remember, if you're coming for Sukkot, register online. It's very simple. We just want to know you're coming so we can print your name tag, and it helps us get an accurate count so we can plan. So if you're planning on coming, come. But our Florida contingency, some of those that wanted to come but just didn't have a way to get here this time, they decided to meet together and do what it is that they could to assemble. I think that's
awesome.
wonderful.
Yeah,
that's what we
awesome.
want. Look, everybody can't be blessed and live in St. Francisville or Pride, Louisiana. But wherever you are, you can start your own group. I mean, that's what it's all about.
And speaking of groups, September 30th, Monday, Kelly Scott is having a ladies' Bible study at her house. I'm going to go for the first time.
Who's that? Who is
Kelly Scott.
Oh, yeah,
Stephen's
yeah.
wife. I think Jodell will be there, and Aaron, and whoever else can make it. It'd be great to see you. I think it's 10 o'clock Monday morning.
Is that just a girls' study?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Rob.
These days and age, anybody can come.
It's all good. However you identify.
I'm sure you could
If
crash
I
it if you
identify as a
wanted
woman,
to.
I go to a woman's Bible study. All right, I'm trying not to go there, but
Okay.
but no, that's great. I think that's the ideal is we want people to come together. Look, there are so many people out there who are we're all in different places. Let's not kid ourselves. We're in different places spiritually and emotionally, but when you can come together and you can sort of agree on what you agree on and discuss respectfully what it is you may not agree on, that's ideal. I mean, it really is ideal, and that's what we try to do. That's what we try to do with what we do here. Whenever we look at these texts, one of the things that I try to do is to associate words, phrases, ideas that are relevant to each other historically, prophetically. You know, you start making connections like that, and it paints sort of a broader picture. Some people don't, they don't bring in all the elements, and therefore they create confusion for themselves and others. So what I'm trying to do is, by showing the correlation, because the prophets certainly did appeal to these ancient things. Example today that I gave in the class was that Hosea refers back to these Genesis accounts, particularly as it relates to the interaction at Bethel. So I wanted to show that connection. And then when I start bringing up, like, you know, today I just touched on Micah 5. Micah 5, 2.2 billion people on the planet claim they know who this is talking about. I get a lot of emails from people if I'm teaching on a subject, and they'll go, you know, the son of David, the king, and this and that. And, you know, like they want me to bring it in right now. Mm-hmm. We're going to get to those texts, but I wanted to bring in today, at least at a first shot, Micah 5 significantly brings up Beit Lechem, Ephratah. A woman who gives birth will give birth again. Who is this talking about? We're going to get into more prophecies about Rachel and weeping for her children. Who are Rachel's children? In fact, let me just pull this over here. Nah, it's too small, I guess.
What you trying to
Well, I was just going to show something on my board here. Let me slide this over
How do I see
here.
what happens?
Huh?
Just see what happens. Go ahead.
See what happens?
We'll fix it.
Let's see what happened. Where's my board? I'm not even in the picture. Maybe
I don't
that's a
know.
good
I don't
thing.
even know where you at.
Look at this. Hold on.
Oh, now you got it. Now you got it.
All right.
Yeah.
This is why this is going to be important. We may have to zoom in, but I want you to imagine you can see this chart, but just look at this.
We can do that.
Go to
Zoom it down.
Jeremiah 31. Now, I'm not going to,
Interesting.
you're getting kind of a bonus because I'm going to do this, but I'm really not doing it. So you're going to get this in a real teaching. But just as an example, just so you can see, Jeremiah 31, verse 14. Jeremiah 31, verse 14. Thus says Jehovah, a voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her sons. She refused to be comforted for her children because they are not. Who are Rachel's children?
Well, Joseph and Ben, but they are not, so she's weeping before she had.
Question becomes, if we're looking at a prophecy in Jeremiah 31, and it says Rachel's weeping for her sons, which are not, what does that tell us? Now, it's been interpreted. The New Testament does this. A lot of other people, Jewish commentators, they say Rachel is weeping for the children of Israel or the Jews. You'll hear all these different ideas. But technically and literally and biblically, this is what it's talking about. Who are Rachel's children? Now, we're going to build on that idea. Because now we've got a context. So you've got actual. So is Rachel weeping for Reuben? Is Rachel weeping for Judah? Is she?
Well, essentially, Joseph is like the leader of the other 10.
Uh-huh.
And so the 10 are gone. They are not. Now,
Ah.
the prophet who's quoting back, this has already happened. So he's quoting, putting it in context, that she is weeping, if she were here.
Yeah,
Rachel is weeping for her children because they are not.
Yeah.
They're gone.
that's right. And yep.
And then, you know, to put this in context, the misinterpretation that certain groups have, if they read further, it says, you know, refrain your voice from weeping, your eyes from tears, for your work shall be rewarded, saith the Lord, and they shall come again
Yeah.
from the land of the enemy.
That's right.
So if these were children that were killed, you know, the babies
By
under
Herod.
3,
Yeah.
they wouldn't come again.
Right, and that's a key point. As we build, as we unpack this story, this is and will be shown to be the greatest story never told, because it's been told a certain way for so long that people think they know the story. You ever hear a story and you go, I know that, yep, I've heard that, and you go, well, what about this? Well, is that in that story? I don't remember that. We're going to pull out certain pieces of information that are clearly part of the story, but that people haven't seen. And you bring up very key point. We're going to get into this and really
I see
unpack this.
that Betty brings it up too. So everybody is seeing that who reads in context.
Yeah,
But
that's right. Yeah, but it helps to undo
I don't
it.
want to get mathematical or anything.
Yeah,
12 sons, 12 brothers.
Yeah, that's fine.
There are 12 sons and 12 tribes, right? So dividing that in thirds, you have the oldest, the youngest, and the middle going someplace with this. In families, sometimes, especially larger families, you hear about
those poor middle children.
the middle children never get any attention. Nobody ever thinks of them. Well, if you look up there, the handmaidens' children are 5, 6, 7, and 8, which are
No,
the middle
middle
4. So they're the middle children. So I'm thinking, of the 10 tribes that have disappeared, those are the least thought about.
you think? Yeah.
Nobody
Well-
took a picture of them.
They can't even picture them. They're the handmaidens' children. I mean,
And you wonder, we're going to see how the psychology plays out too. We're going to get into the Joseph saga. Joseph is daddy's boy. You know, I mean, you can feel the tension when you read if you read it like I read it. You can feel the tension. Remember when he walks up and he's wearing his new coat, and he's kind of a, you know, I think he's brilliant, but he's just young, he's handsome. He walks up and he goes, "Hey guys, Daddy just made me a new jacket. Look at it. Look at me."
What do
You
you
know,
think
and he
about that?
spins
Look what
around.
Daddy
and,
made for
you know,
me.
look at that.
Yeah.
Dad just made me one. Look at this beautiful. You know, and they're like, "We're gonna kill him.
Yeah.
We're gonna absolutely kill him."
Rub
They
the
say,
rocks.
"Look here." When he's
Rub it
walking up,
in,
I know
baby.
boys. I have 4 of them.
Good.
I know, and I have grandsons. And here's what they go. They go, "Oh,
Here comes the code.
here comes the dreamer." You know, oh boy, it's the dreamer. Because then he's like, "You're not gonna believe it. I had this dream, and I was up here, and you guys were down here kissing my feet, and it's just typical brother stuff." But when we look at these stories, you bring up a good point. The boys, the handmaidens' sons. What we're going to find as we work through this is historically there are things within the text that you wouldn't notice if you don't get this picture. Now think about this. I wanted you to see today when Jacob thinks there might be trouble, he puts the kids in a certain order and the women.
Yeah, that was interesting that you showed that.
Yeah.
That was real interesting.
Because it hit me last
Yeah.
night when I was looking at it and I thought, let's see how this plays out. If I'm Jacob, remember I told you I try to get in the text and I imagine, I'm not crazy, but I want to really get it. So I'll try to imagine what it's like. And I'm Jacob, so I say, Rachel, come here for a minute. Bring Joseph. You guys come here. Stand right here. Okay, ladies, kids, everybody, look at me. Zilpah, Bilhah, ladies, please. You bring your children. I need you in line first. You get to meet my brother first. You guys right here. Now, Leah, you and the boys get the 6 kids. Bring Dina. You got okay. And now Rachel, hang to the back. I don't know how this is going to go. Am I adding to the text? I'm looking at it. I'm trying to think about it. He clearly has the protection of Rachel and Joseph as his primary driver there. Not that he wants anything bad to happen to the other kids.
Didn't he
But-
separate them into 2 camps?
Yeah, now you have 2 camps, yeah.
Is there a
So-
listing with that?
It doesn't spell it out. In Genesis 32, he says, you know, here I am in 2 camps. I left with just my staff. Now I've got 2 camps. So you can almost picture, you know, this.
Thinking the handmaidens and the boys are in the front, and Leah is in the second camp with Rachel even farther in the back.
Well, it pictures it linear by the time they cross over. But nonetheless, handmaiden and children first.
Yeah.
Leah, her boys, and Dina next. Then Rachel and Rachel and Joseph. The idea that we want to see is that as we work through this, all of this is very important. These scribes are recording things that we shouldn't miss. And I think that that's the narrative flow as it unfolds. It really does reveal things to us about the people, about what they're thinking. You know, I'll be careful. I always say this is what it says, and you know, if I'm speculating or embellishing or adding to it in the sense of trying to make sense of it, I'll make that clear.
If I was one of the 4 that was on the forefront,
Yeah,
probably all the time,
yeah,
you know, Dad and Asher and Dan and then subsequently any children they had, always on that forefront. It would seem to me that they would be the children that were most, on edge is the wrong word, keen to their surroundings out of necessity. And probably end up, if it came to it, they would, as they grew and got stronger and better and older, probably the better fighters of the group,
yeah.
because they were always put in a position to be in the forefront.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just guessing. It doesn't say anything about that, but if you think about it, if you're going to put, you know, keep your quote-unquote wives to the rear with their children and put them up front all the time, where if something goes wrong, they're the first to go, what does that do to those people? I mean, what
Yeah.
does it do to those kids?
The psychology.
It makes
Yeah,
them think, we got to take care of ourselves, and we got to stick together.
yeah.
So I was thinking those 4 are probably pretty tight.
Well, one of the things that this shows too is, like, for instance, whenever we look at the encampment at you know, that's depicted in the Torah, you have the central point of the camp, and you have 3 tribes in the north, 3 tribes on the east, 3 tribes in the south, 3 tribes on the west. Who are these 3 tribes? Who is where? How do they encamp? When the tribes get their possession, when they inherit the land, where are they in regards to the land of Israel? Where do the tribes fall out on the map? So we want to start looking at, do they stay together? Now, if this is true, if they do stay together, do we have evidence that once they're scattered, that certain groups remain together even then? So all of these details.
So you think there is? Oh, you won't give it away?
Well, no, not yet, but I do think that there are some associations that remain intact now.
Says that in the story.
Yeah. Now the thing that I want to look at too is, and I'll be really focusing on this, is that like Dave says, number one, son, number 4 and number 11, son.
Sometimes they flip now. I don't know.
That's
Yeah.
what Ross was saying. It depends on how they're acting.
Yeah. You remember when I was a kid, they had
Last week Ben was
the
number one.
not an etch a sketch, but
This
you
week
remember the
mine.
little pads you could write on and pull the tie and it'd erase it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like who's number 1, and he. Well, Reuben messes up, but what I want to do is I want to focus in on, because the Bible focuses in on, both from the Torah narration as well as the prophets and the Psalms. Now we have a lot of things to incorporate into this. A lot of people become exposed to a lot of great academic works, even in terms of source material for the Torah. People that don't really understand that sort of have a cursory understanding of it, they read, let's say, one or two or maybe 5 books about it, and they think they got it. What they miss a lot of times is, how does this play in? I'm not scared to go there. Mm-hmm. I'll talk about the sources in the Pentateuch, as we call it, but how does that relate to this? See, everything comes down to this.
Judah and Joseph, if you can't see.
That's right.
Yeah.
Judah and Joseph.
Okay.
So if I do this and I write Judah, is that readable? Can you tell? Mm-hmm. And Joseph, it's probably not neat
Sure,
enough.
yeah.
But we have the two, Judah
Well,
and
you're
Joseph.
standing in front of it.
I'm in front of it. Whenever we talk about source material, we're going to talk about not only these two groups as far as it deals with the prophets that were assigned to each, we're going to talk about the kings that belong to each. We're going to talk about, the prophecies that are attributed to one group versus the other, or who they speaking to. The other thing we're going to talk about is, a lot of people don't know this. They don't know that there are priesthoods that are associated with each group as well. So you have competing priesthoods that are associated with the northern tribes, the southern tribes, and it always gets me because a lot of times someone will read a couple of books on this and they take it as gospel. This is what it is, the documentary hypothesis or the documentary hypothesis, and then they kind of know just, this much. But they don't know the underlying story. How did we get there?
Yeah, let's go back here, my memory isn't what it used to be, but wasn't it Judah, when Joseph was in the well, that said, let's not kill him, let's sell him?
Sounds familiar, John.
I can't remember if it was
Yeah,
him, but I think
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah.
I think it was Judah.
Because,
Judah
and
or-
Judah's always had a very.
Reuben.
Remember,
I think-
Reuben has something to do with this. We're gonna. This is the Joseph saga.
Yeah, but the
I'm
thing
listening. I gotta
is,
get some water.
Judah is kind of a bigger person, I guess you'd say. He's more interested in, he's not rash. He's not, he cares more, I guess.
Cares more about his dad.
His
You kind
dad's
of read that in
father,
it.
and he really doesn't want to do anything that's too far out there wrong.
Because later on, Benjamin was.
Well, I think it's not in the scripture, I don't believe, but I think Judah, being the nature that he is, being a kind of caring, saving, more reserved brother, when Joseph was gone, and he still felt bad about that, it was the only thing he could think
He
of
tried
to
to
save
fix it.
Joseph's life.
That what now? That
When they sold him into slavery, that was the only thing Judah could think to save his life from his brothers, because I think that he probably felt he couldn't overpower them if they wanted to kill him, so he had to try and convince them to do that,
He had some pull
to
there.
save Joseph's life. So when they get back, I kind of feel like Judah would have taken Benjamin under his wing, being the little brother, to take care of him, and that, when you look at the map later on, you see that the tribe of Judah and Benjamin is pretty close. That may account for some of that.
Well, we're definitely going to talk about what tribe, what ancestral house speaks up, in the story of the narrative, and how does that play out prophetically? Because even if a person doesn't believe in the historicity of these accounts, whoever put this together, like this is the passion of my life, it's all I do. I spend a lot of time in these texts. I look at it from a source critical. I look at historical, academic. I've looked at it every way that I think I can think of to look at it. And what I begin to notice is that there is a level of continuity and a level of association that many people miss in their rash decision making. They miss that the historical accounts line up very, very well with the prophetic accounts of the same groups. So this is essential on many, many levels. In other words, people just don't get this, I think, if you don't really look at it right.
There's some comments on YouTube, basically about the relationship between Jacob and Rachel being closer, the mother, and of course the children are gonna be favored, so to speak. And so there's just some conversation there. There's a question, and I'm not sure how to answer that. Regina, am I following correctly? Rachel died in what is now Bethlehem,
Yeah.
and Ephraim was blessed as the first fruit? That was a question. I want to know. I don't know.
Yeah, let me pull up the question and
Yeah.
see.
Interesting that I look at, while you're pulling up the question and looking, the age difference
Yeah.
between Reuben and Joseph, and, they're very easily could have been 20 or more years in age difference.
Oh, and the difference, yeah,
Sure.
yeah, it could easily be.
Yeah.
And when we don't get a lot of detail around, and it was this many months and she conceived again, we read chapter 29, verse 30 through chapter 30, verse 20, 25, and we read it like in 10, 15 seconds,
Right.
and it could
We don't usually
literally
like-
be 2 decades,
It's like they
right?
adopted them all of a sudden. One day they were there, one day they
Yeah,
weren't.
she's
Well,
got 6, she's got...
She had Reuben, and 9 months
Yeah.
later Simeon, 9 months later, and oh, by the way, while she's having, Judah, Bilhah has Dan, within a day or two, it could be that way, but then again, it
So what do you
could
think the
be.
age difference was between Reuben and Bilhah?
Here's the other question. We don't even know, for instance, we don't know ethnicity
Right.
when it comes to Zilpah and Bilhah. Now you could say, well, they're from Padan Aram.
never
We
know.
don't know.
We don't know that.
We don't know that.
The only reason we knew what
Here-
Sarah's handmaiden was is because
It
was
says.
in the literature.
Yeah.
That,
Here's-
it was the
Here's one.
Egyptian.
Here's one thing we can kind of know. It's a philosophical idea. Is that if Jacob would have just left well enough alone, he would have had 2 sons from Rachel, and that would have been it. I mean, otherwise, in other words, my point is, God told him he was going to have these children, and he was married to somebody that wasn't having the children,
Like
so
father and like son.
he tried to
Take it in his own
take it
hands.
in his own hands.
Abraham did the
And
same
What
thing.
would have happened if he didn't have done that, and we'd only had 2 sons?
Or
How would that would
the,
change the picture?
8 sons
Or maybe-
instead of 12,
Hear me-
because
hear
we're
me-
missing
yeah.
4 if he hadn't.
Well, hear me out here. So maybe that was the ultimate plan, and that's initially,
Yeah.
that's exactly what happened
Well,
in
His
in now
grandfather did the
time.
same thing.
Right.
He had a child with his wife's handmaid, and they went off to Egypt.
Yeah.
Guys never learn.
But so I'm just saying, God's ultimate will. I don't even like using those phrases, but let's just say that was His will to have the 2 sons.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that's what's happened. Is what I'm trying to get at.
And how about
Now
Joseph's
we have
sons?
10 that are gone and lost, so to speak. Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to stick with the story. We have 2, Judah and Benjamin, basically in Israel.
Well, we have to figure out, because it's like the strange thing. There's a lot of different ways to present it.
Sure.
We could look at, for instance, in past classes, we might talk about the reunion of Judah and Joseph.
Right.
You go, oh yeah, Ezekiel 37, 2 sticks, one right this, one right that, put them together, they're back. There it is. It's the plan of God. But what I want to try to show is how do we get to Judah and Joseph
Right.
from the patriarchal narratives. Now, I believe that these patriarchal narratives are very old, and there are academics who are out there who are very brilliant, some of the greatest minds, who support some of these same leanings based on a lot of other evidence. So there's a lot of questions that come in, but I want to look at every aspect of this. So whenever we look at the story and how it unfolds, one of the things that Ross Bearden brought up, this I remember I mentioned that Ross wrote me. We ultimately talked on the phone for a little while. And I made a big deal a couple of classes back about how in the days of Rehoboam, after Solomon dies, Rehoboam and Jeroboam come together for this meeting. And Jeroboam said, look, make it easy on us and, we'll serve you. And Jeroboam is told by Rehoboam, nope, we're not going to do it. No deal. There's a formal separation there. Ross Bearden called me and he said, you're right, but don't forget these other elements, namely, and it's really a good point, and I intended to get into some of this, but his call made me really dig deeply. His point was this. Guy's very, very studied. He studied the scripture like a lot of you many, 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 many years. He said, when you think about it, these groups, let's just say Judah and Joseph, were separate from the earliest days. It didn't just happen in 1 Kings 11. There's a formal severance there, but these kingdoms were functioning separately well before that. So we're now, because of his call, this other email I got, and my own studies, I've said, I want to go back in, dive deeper, and begin to build it up with a better foundation than what I would have probably done. So it helps sometimes for people to say, hey, Ross, what about this?
Well, this is of them as, most people would agree, I think, that there are two stories that you have. One of when you're a kid and another when you're an adult. And yet, it's a foundation thing, but you mature and act differently, hopefully, as an adult than you did as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that would be the same with them. They had this arrangement, and then Joseph left, right? And they went on, and Judah emerges as the strength of that group. Joseph, in the meantime, goes off and becomes a power eventually, with God's direction and assistance, becomes a power unto his own in Egypt. So you've got these two guys that become, in that family, that become really powerful and really great. When they come back together, Judah's a big help in getting them back together. And I think, and it's not in the scriptures, but I think when they all came back to Egypt, that relationship was between Joseph and Judah was probably a lot closer and more friendly based upon their maturity over the others. And when the tribes went back to the land, you had all of those that were under Joseph, and then Judah and Benjamin, is the way it kind of broke out.
What we're going to do is we're going to take that approach. We're going to look at, in the Joseph saga, how early do we see Judah and Joseph emerge among the 12, right? Now, Joseph, when we follow the Joseph saga, we see that he is, as you put it, placed in that position. Now, remember, Joseph is going to be used to bring salvation to all of Israel. Joseph is. Judah is as well. The two of these work together with one thing as their focal point that helps bring this salvation. So we're going to begin to look at this historically from the text, from the narrative, and then we're also going to apply that in the prophecies and say, do we see recurring themes that play out? And that's what's going to really open people's eyes, I think.
That they hadn't discovered anything like that I'm aware it'd be interesting to note if it were possible, and I don't think archaeologically there's anything like that, I don't think there's scripturally anything about the city, town city, if you will, where Joseph lived, that they all went to, which was later named Ramses. There was when they became slaves, they had a big community. There were a lot of Hebrew there, a lot of Israelites. Be interesting to note, and I don't know if that would be possible, how the sections of where they lived separated. I'm guessing it would be along, because of their background, along tribal lines. Who knows?
You know, familial associations, you know,
Yeah.
we get some evidence from the text. So it's going to be a matter of what can we determine from the text? What can we speculate? Because that's okay. I mean, we just have to say, look, we don't know this, but here's what we can assume based on this, this, and this. But a lot of people are asking questions like Miriam says, will I touch upon Joseph's coat of many colors? Not only will I touch on Joseph's coat of many colors, as it's called, a kotnot pasim, that is only used one other time in Scripture. Joseph's coat, there's only one other person that has a kotnot pasim.
No prophet.
And we're going to talk about that. And we're going to say, who was it? Who was it? Because if we can find out who it was, first of all, is it really a coat of many colors, as it's translated? Where else do we find that Hebrew phrase, and what can we learn from that story? Here's the problem when a person takes the Bible and they separate it from any potential divine revelation status. You know, if they go, oh, it's just a book, it's not really this, it's just kind of a collection of stories that are just... When people have that approach and they fail to have a healthy respect for the text, even if they study the other, that's fine, but they miss so many details, associations that are hard to fake, if you will. We're going to be bringing those things out. So I want to take this idea of Joseph and his favored status. I'm going to show everything I can from the text about Joseph historically in the patriarchal period, play that all the way forward. I want to look at Judah's behavior, play it all the way forward. And I think that when we can take history and prophecy and weave the two together, we ultimately come away with a picture that paints much clearer for our vision, right? Sort of Sherry was saying that the visual is helpful. I think other people have said that too. When we can use other things aside from me just being a talking head, I think it's going to help. I think it's going to help people understand it better. So,
I think so too.
What you reading there, Shay?
I'm just looking at
Better Homes and Gardens.
Well,
no,
it's
it's the
on the garden.
biblical maps and stuff. Just trying to look at where we're
So
talking
what are the
about.
impact of Joseph's wife
Oh, Asnat.
on her children and how that translated to the impact? I mean, there's nothing on this that I'm aware of. How that related to the impact on the house of Joseph as it developed. Because, I mean, she was the daughter of the high priest of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And so, obviously, she, you know,
She converted
yeah, right, but I mean,
into
But-
discussion.
Thanks, Linda.
but
It's all
dad is
good.
dead. But the thing is, what did she teach her children? Because
Right.
he's out saving Egypt, right? 7 years of
Did they
fat by
worship on
7 years of lean.
Friday,
and-
Saturday, or Sunday? That's what you're basically saying. Is that?
Well, I don't think they've established Friday
I'm
or
just
Sunday
saying.
yet.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
think
How
if
do you
you
raise your
look
children?
at the history and
Yeah.
you see that those two boys become tribes of Israel, that they were that she raised them according to their father's beliefs. I mean,
Did Rachel? Because Rachel was very fond of her idols.
Rachel.
Well, so
They were
there,
tchotchkes on her shelf, and it was okay.
when we go to when we look at the story of
It's
Joseph,
all good.
Joseph does marry
With toys.
into an Egyptian priestly family, right?
Yeah.
We get from the story that Joseph, through a series of unfortunate events which were intended for good, ultimately are part of the plan of salvation, if you will. But he hits bottom, it's rags to riches and riches to rags and back and forth, and it's this gripping drama. In fact, scholars call it a novella. It's like this idea, it's one of the most beautiful pieces of ancient history. And many scholars are now, it's like the scientific community. Scientific community develops certain theories based upon their understanding and their knowledge and everything that they can bring in terms of academic discipline to their field. Biblical scholarship is the same. Biblical scholarship has learned vast amounts in the last 5 years that they didn't know in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. There are people who are challenging for the first time some great biblical scholarship of the late 1800s. Look, certain theories, this is what gets me, is that a lot of people are now finally in 2019, or let's say they discovered in 2015 that there was a documentary hypothesis. And people get into that, and they're like, oh, this is a done deal. And they go, here, it says this. This scholar said that. Yeah, he said that in 1986. You know what we've learned since then? Have you also read this? What about this? The novella, this Joseph saga, which I'm going to really begin to get into, certain scholars are dating that very, very early. So in the untrained person's mind, who only has a rudimentary understanding of the documentary hypothesis, what they begin to do is say the entire Torah of Moses is late. They push it late. And they continually push it later. Academics, many of which have grown beyond that. First of all, they've always had debates over dating. But what they're doing is this Joseph saga seems to represent some very early strata. We have linguistic studies that are out now, which are dating things earlier. They're pushing the limit. We have, Barry Page has written a couple of books. He and I may not agree 100% on all our arrival points, but I have learned a good deal from him. It's challenged me to go study other things. But we have whole branches of academia who are looking at this different stratification, different layers within the Hebrew Bible. Certain usages of words and certain vocabulary that falls off in a late biblical period that's present in some text which they thought they had originally solved to be a late date interpolation. Anyway, that's outside the scope of my teaching right now. It's something that I study. Right now I want to focus on, let's look at the stories as we have them. When we have what's called a doublet, let's talk about it.
Yeah, that was brought up.
Yeah, and it's going to be because there are some stories which, like when we get into the Joseph saga, for instance, many academics will look at the story of Joseph being sold into slavery, and they go, this just doesn't make sense.
Right.
Like, who took the boy? Was it a Midianite? Was it this group? Was it that group? I mean, and in some scholarship back in the early 1900s, 1800s even, they would go, well, this is evidence of different sources and how they've come together. Is it? Is that proven? Is that settled? Or have people not been carefully reading the text?
Okay, so for someone who doesn't know the definition of a doublet, could you briefly explain?
Yeah, it's like if you have two stories giving the same story with different details.
Okay.
So, like, one example is, according to many in academic circles, the Torah contains a doublet on the creation. I'm just going to give the top level.
I got a pillow.
One, Genesis 1 represents one of those stories. Genesis 2 represents another. They say it's obvious as the light of day because you have a different order of the elements that are created, and it's just totally. So people look at it and they go, it's a doublet. One is from one source, one is from another.
Different time.
Yeah, it helped. It helped in many ways scholars to unpack certain brilliant discoveries, I think. But we're gonna tackle some of that, especially as regards the tribes. I want people to approach the Bible, even some of the what you might call academic geniuses of our time, and some may not agree. But when you look at Richard Elliott Friedman, for instance, he's considered one of the top Hebrew Bible scholars alive today. Very much an advocate of the documentary hypothesis. He says some pretty nice things which made it something I could understand when I read his works years ago. And one of the things that he says is he had a great love and respect for the text. A lot of people don't. If someone has a love and respect for the text and they have differences with me, that's okay. I can have a wonderful conversation with them. If, on the other hand, though, they come across as arrogant and pompous and speaking, in a down, making fun of, condescending, laughing, whatever, our conversation's over, right? I don't want to take the time. I have the time maybe, but I'm not going to spend it on that. I want to know what this book says, and I want to know what it means. In this particular study on the tribes, it's vast. So we can kind of go where we want to go. But next week, I want to begin the Joseph saga and really unpack that story.
To back up
The
a
novella.
couple of lessons. We had the two parts to the, for lack of a better word, the forced exodus of the tribes from northern Israel to Assyria. And it happened in two stages, right? So when you go to the other end, from the records,
Assyrian
the
side.
Assyrian records, I'm given to understand from some other non-scriptural other stuff that I was reading associated with the Assyrian account, that they had set those tribes they had taken back up as a border wall essentially for them to fight any intruders into Assyria because, quote unquote, the reason I got in that about them being on the forefront
Yeah.
was I guess I'll go back and look at the maps and see which likely were the tribes that were taken. They say that they were fierce fighters, that those and they set them up as a border barrier, and they governed themselves. They had their own farmland, their own cattle, and everything like that, and their own idols, and good schools and stuff. Because when somebody would attack Assyria, they had to go through them, and they'd get worn out. So that even if they made it through, it was an easy mop up for Assyria. So I'm just curious, just curiosity, which northern tribes it was that they moved into those positions that were the fierce fighters.
Yeah, we actually do have some evidence on that. We have names from soldier list. We have Semitic names that are predominantly from Canaan that appear on a Syrian list. We have accounts from Assyrian leadership which talk about various encounters and defeats and wars and victories, and even describing some of the same events that are spoken of in the Hebrew Bible. So again, biblical scholarship has gained vast amounts of information and knowledge in the last 20 years even. But some of it has been there for a lot longer that people haven't really paid attention to. But we have validating text from external sources to the Bible which confirm that these events took place. Now, people might argue the details, like, did the king of Assyria capture 183,000, or did he capture this many? You know, the Bible may say one thing, the Assyrian record may say the other.
A goodly amount,
Yeah, it's a lot of people, right?
a lot of people.
But we do have
Start over on the
stories
count.
that when they're taken captive, we do know, first of all, that there were several waves of deportation.
Right.
And the first deportation, it's mentioned in the Bible in First Chronicles. It's also mentioned in the Accounting Kings, and it's mentioned in Assyrian accounts. We know that let's call it Transjordan, the tribes, you know, the Gadites, the half tribe of Manasseh and the Reuben,
North Israel.
northeast
Yeah.
across the Jordan, those are taken captive first. We know that some of those ended up in some of these positions.
And those taken captives of those tribes, before that happened, some of them fled and went south.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, so when
Scattered is, you know, it's scattered. They really were
Scattered, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, and when we divvy these up and we show a breakdown of generally, I'll say generally,
Right.
these groups ended up here, these groups ended up
Right.
here,
Yeah.
but you have some mixing.
Yeah, and I'm not a history buff, and I don't know, but I'm sure that if they were captured and moved, the capturers would not allow them to stay in their tribe.
Well,
Little thing, they would
but when
mix
they
them
set
up, make
those,
them intermarriage, and
Ultimately.
so on and so forth.
but at the time when they put those fierce fighters there, they were from a couple of different tribes that were in
Oh, yeah.
that northeast section of Israel, and they wanted them whole and they wanted them there
Yeah.
because we'll let you go. You stay right here,
Right.
do what you
Swap it
want.
all around.
But
make
if
it-
somebody comes your way, take them out.
I guess. That was
So-
the job.
And but the thing is, all those people were idol worshippers too.
Oh, no.
Or most of them. I mean, that was the problem, is why they got offed
They had that
by God,
cow.
pushed out, you
They
know,
had that
like Russ
cow,
says,
yeah.
regurgitated from the land.
Yep.
And so I guess
It's-
over time,
it's definitely-
migration of that group into idol worshiping other parts of the world would have been easy.
It's
They wouldn't have even at some point in time, wouldn't even remember where they came from.
Well, that's what happens.
Dave Tyler earlier on comments said, this is high drama here. You know, this is it.
Timothy has a comment I'd like to address. Thinking about what Ross said concerning revelation and scripture, and the text is a record of revelation. It contains divine speech. The text itself isn't divine, but quotes the divine. Okay, so the text itself is not divine. The same Spirit of God that inspired men to write and this record of what God said is still alive. And isn't it possible that this same Spirit of God can give a person guidance and discernment and not just the intellectual knowledge, but somehow give credence somehow.
I don't think he's saying that that's not possible, though.
Yeah.
Is that what you're? So I think
Glad
that
she wasn't looking at me like
I think whenever, first of all, about the text, I think that there are different genres represented within these covers. You have history, you have wisdom literature, you have, stories that have been written. You have
Music.
certain stories
Yeah, poetry,
which we
music.
can look at and we go, that's a pretty
Philosophy.
priestly record there. I mean, it leans in certain tendencies. The brilliance of what scholars have come up with over the ages is they're looking at different things like that. They're not just like when I grew up Southern Baptist. It was this is the inspired,
Inspired.
authoritative,
Infallible.
holy,
Ordained.
infallible,
Word of God.
You know,
Authorized.
and you're like, well, what about? And you're like, no, it's the whole. So that was the idea. Now, what we've got though is, if we look at this, it does contain within it, and I stress this, especially when I'm dealing with prophetic literature, whether it's in the Torah, the prophets' writings. You have this divine speech,
Yes.
which does intrude. We'll call it intruding into the normal conversation of men. 1 Samuel 10:6, the Spirit of the Lord will come upon you and you'll be a different person. It's Moses, where Moses claims to be, first person, Moses says, I am Jehovah your God.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, that didn't happen. Yeah, we know it does because I've talked about it before. A prophet can speak first person for God. We have that level of inspiration. We also have stories that occur where we have to ask the question, how do we know that this happened and who recorded this? So who was there that recorded this? It's written in the third person. Well, that's what my book is about. I'm writing a book
Yeah.
right now.
The third,
and I-
Jude.
Yeah. No, but I'm writing a book right now, and I'm working on that book about, I'm using the Torah as a model for that, because I have studied for years documentary hypothesis, the various academic views, the biblical literature, rabbinic views on it. And I'm trying to present this in such a way that it's a respectful view of the text that I fell in love with as a little boy. And it's still, I'm telling you, there is not a day of my life that I don't wake up and begin to study and go to bed. I mean, this is my life. I mean, everything about this book. So, to the point, that God, I believe, the God of this book, I do believe in that God. I do believe that Jehovah, Hu Ha-Elohim, Yehovah, Yod-He Vav-He, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I believe is guiding the affairs of men. And I believe that we can still find salvation through that God and through the plan that He laid out for the ages, which ultimately begins with a special group, Israel. And I think that's one of the main reasons I'm focusing on this, because Israel becomes the mechanism whereby God is going to bring salvation to the ends of the earth. And this is where I'm focusing. So
Israel as in a people, not as in
Country.
a country.
and so Timothy, the text of Genesis I consider to be a post-Moses. I don't think Moses ever heard of what we call Genesis. So there are various views. There are views all over the map. There's a minimalist view that Timothy is espousing here, and there are variations to that view. There are some strands of Genesis that the greatest minds who've ever looked at this text would say, well, now hold on, it depends on what part you're talking about. So there are different views. There's the maximalist view that says Moses wrote, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz v'haaretz haytato v'bova. He wrote every word. And then there are others that say, no.
He might have, Moses might have invented the word Genesis.
Yeah,
He
maybe.
might have been the first person ever uttered that word. We don't know.
So
Well,
Genesis is
I believe
Genesis
he wrote
is an
Deuteronomy.
interesting phrase. It is an interesting book, and the most fascinating part about it is that as we get into this, you're going to see some, I think, some pretty incredible things. Now, look, some people already have their mind up. They've already solved all the issues and problems, and they already know.
Yep.
But for those of us who don't know yet, stick with me. It's going to get exciting. And I'm looking forward to it because I think when people really, this is what, like, I love this. Let me pull this up. Let's see if my memory serves me right.
He's gone now.
Look, there's a lot of books here.
He's walking.
A lot of books. Let me see.
He's back.
String on Ross
keep
and have the
talking.
camera.
Yeah. String on it.
This is from a letter adapted from a lecture of Martin Buber. It's in the translator's preface.
Years, this ball is-
It's in the translator's preface of the 5 Books of Moses by Everett Fox. Read the Bible as though it were something entirely unfamiliar, as though it had not been set before you ready-made. Face the book with a new attitude as something new. Let whatever may happen occur between yourself and it. You don't know which of its sayings and images will overwhelm and mold you, but hold yourself open. Don't believe anything a priori. Don't disbelieve anything a priori. Read aloud the words written in the book in front of you. Hear the word you utter and let it reach you. The Bible is an incredible book. It's a fascinating study. It is the most important document that has ever reached humanity. And I love it, and I want to study it every week. And let me tell you, I've read a lot of opinions about the book, and I've heard a lot of people make very bold statements about, well, here's what I believe is this. And you know what I've come to find out? A lot of people base their conclusions on limited study. They have far-reaching conclusions with very limited research. So what I want to do is I want to dig and dig and dig, and to me, a lot of these questions that many people have already decided, the jury is still out. I'm still fascinated with it. So hopefully that helped you. I look forward to the next one.
I don't know where to post that quote.
Yeah,
Oh.
I mean, it's just
What does Yokanani call you? What's the nickname he has for you?
I don't know. Like
Rosalie.
Rossi Yahoo or
Rusty
something.
Yahoo, yeah.
The 5 Books of Moses, the 5 Books of Moses by Everett Fox. And really incredible translation, by the way. So, but again, look, there are a lot of different opinions out there. There's a minimalist group and there's a maximalist group, and I want to have an informed view from, from the ancient all the way up to the modern. So, if you've already made your mind up, you might be bored with this. But if you're interested in digging and looking at linguistics and archaeology, and you might be in the right group. So, it's been a beautiful day. I'm thankful that my voice held up. I have about, 48 hours, and I have to record. I have a short break. I have to record again. Jono and I plan to begin the Kingdom Chronicles recording sessions this week. And so hopefully that'll be coming out pretty soon. And I look forward to next weekend. I'm going to begin our study on the Joseph Saga. You guys have anything to add in before we all go take a nap?
Yeah, we're all, there must be a
Let's just,
front moving in or something, because we're
That was-
struggling.
Yeah.
The other day I looked out the window. I was in here.
Heat wave broke finally. That's what it
Yeah.
was.
I looked out and it looked like it was cool. You know how it looks when it's
The
cool?
crisp, the shadows
It
are
looked.
crisp and the
It looked. I
cloud.
opened the door and
Yeah.
almost passed out. It was
Yeah.
like 112.
Yeah, I know.
But
It's
it looked
taking me
better.
to-
Crystal
yeah.
clear.
It's
Looked
looking.
cool, but
It's looking
nah.
cooler.
Well, like yesterday, we went bike riding and the temperature was lower, but boy, that humidity was, because it had poured for an hour
Oh,
the
yeah.
night before.
So it was like all
Fortunately, it was still cool enough it wasn't that
evaporating
bad.
into the air.
Yeah.
Hey, look, if you got something out of the class, if it made sense to you, please feel free to share it. We're trying to, reach people that are interested in studying the Bible. So hopefully it made some sense and made some things clear.
One of the things on the visit in October for Sukkot, it helps if we know, again, what Ross said, if we know who's coming. Sherry and I are doing the lunch for Saturday and Sunday. It helps us to make sure we have enough for everybody that are here if we know approximately how many people are coming.
That's right.
So make sure you register. It's kind of important. If you don't show up, that's fine. But if you think there's a really good chance, go ahead and register so we can gauge appropriately, because we don't want to run, have people not have enough for a good lunch on
And
those
even,
days.
and even if you don't register, still come on.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, Something,
Yeah,
last
that-
minute, don't.
Yeah,
show
last
up,
minute thing, yeah,
But yeah, in
If you
general,
can,
we're just saying,
yeah.
it would be nice to have a number.
Road trip.
Yeah, an
No,
idea.
Dave, don't show up if you didn't
If
register.
you didn't register.
I'm telling you, don't show up.
Right.
We're gonna stop you at the door.
we'll lock you at the door, gonna have to show ID.
Don't worry, Dave, I registered for you.
We'll put
Dave might let you in. I'm not letting you in. If I don't have a
We'll put
name
you
tag.
somewhere, we'll put you somewhere.
I don't know if I've registered, I don't know.
You registered.
Yeah.
You registered me,
Yes.
okay.
Bang a bong in down the road or something.
You guys have a beautiful week. We'll see you
Shalom.
next time,
Shalom.
next week, same time, same channel. And looking forward to working with all of you again next Saturday as we jump into the Joseph saga. Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov.
Tov.